I had exactly 45 seconds before the vintage Bordeaux was uncorked, and the lead tore through his expensive silk shirt. My fingers trembled against the leather of my order pad, the ballpoint ink smearing as I scribbled a warning that felt more like a death warrant. Around me, the gilded lotus hummed with the low-frequency vibration of absolute wealth, the chime of crystal, the hushed gossip of the elite, and the scent of expensive perfume that suddenly smelled like a funeral arrangement. Outside, the city was a blur of neon and rain, but inside, the air was thick, heavy, and suffocating. I approached table 1 as if I were walking toward my own execution. Chairman Kang Min-yi sat there, looking as though he had been carved from cold obsidian. His jaw was sharp, his black hair slicked back with a precision that signaled absolute authority, and his charcoal suit likely cost more than my father's remaining years of medical care. One hand rested casually on the white tablecloth, his fingers drumming a slow, predatory rhythm that told the world he was untouchable. Beside him, Elena Voss leaned in, her diamond earrings throwing fractured rainbows across the table as she whispered something that made her perfect, blood-red lips curve into a smile. To any other observer, she looked like a woman deeply in love. She was. 20 minutes ago, I had been in the basement wine vault, a glass-walled sanctuary where the bottles glowed like jewels. I was reaching for a 2015 reserve when I heard her voice, sharp and cold as razor wire, confirming his execution over a secure line. Now, as I leaned in under the guise of taking a dessert order, the boundary between service and survival vanished. My lips were inches from the chairman's ear, the only thing standing between his predatory calm and the cold betrayal sitting right beside him. "Don't drink that," I whispered, my voice a thin thread of courage in a room full of monsters. "They're already waiting outside." The transition from the humid, bustling main floor of the Gilded Lotus to the wine cellar always felt like entering a different dimension. The cellar wasn't a basement so much as a temperature-controlled vault of glass and steel, where $1,000 vintages glowed like liquid jewels under soft, recessed lighting. I had been sent down to pull a 2015 reserve for Table 7, my mind occupied with the mundane math of tuition payments and my father's rising hospital bills. I was threading my way past rows of Bordeaux and Burgundy when the silence of the vault was punctured by a voice, female, sharp, and cold as a winter snap. I froze between the Chiantis and the Brunellos, my hand still resting on the cool glass of a bottle. It was Elena Voss. She was speaking Italian, her voice dropping into a register that made my skin crawl. "Table 1 by the glass," she said, her words echoing faintly against the stone floor. I knew enough restaurant Italian to understand the basic geography, but then she switched to a language that sounded like Russian, faster, sharper, like she was wrapping razor wire around every syllable. I should have announced myself, cleared my throat, or made my presence known like the professional I was trained to be. Instead, my heart began to hammer against my ribs as I listened to the confirmation of a countdown. "You'll have a clean shot as soon as he settles," she continued, her tone unmistakable even through the fragments I couldn't fully parse. The air in the cellar, climate-controlled to exactly 55 degrees, suddenly felt arctic. I pressed my back against a wine rack, praying the shadows and the dusty vintages would swallow me whole. Through the narrow gaps between the bottles, I caught a glimpse of her as she moved toward the stairs. She was tall and elegant, wearing a white dress that looked like it cost more than my entire nursing school tuition. Her dark hair was swept up, her diamond earrings catching the dim light as she played the role of the loving fiancé. In that moment, the white of her dress didn't look like a wedding garment anymore. It looked like a funeral arrangement. She disappeared up the stairs, the click of her heels fading, leaving behind only the scent of her perfume, something expensive and floral that now carried the metallic tang of death. I stood there for 10, 20 seconds, waiting for my legs to remember how to function. My brain was already sprinting through the horrifying clarity of what I'd heard. Table 1, the glass wall, and the assassins already in position. Kang Min-yi, the man the city called chairman, was sitting up there with his back to the window, completely unaware that the woman touching his arm had just orchestrated his execution. I looked at the bottle in my hand and then at the stairs. I could walk away, clock out, and let the monsters finish each other off. But I thought of mercy unearned and the nurses who stayed late to hold my father's hand. I grabbed a receipt from my apron, clicked my pen, and realized that my invisible life was about to end. The dining room of the Gilded Lotus felt like a stage where the actors were unaware the set was rigged to collapse. My reflection in the polished wine glasses looked ghost pale as I stepped back onto the floor, my serving tray pressed against my chest like a shield. Every step toward table one felt like walking through deep water, time stretching and contracting with every beat of my heart. I scanned the room with new, panicked eyes, spotting the man at the bar nursing a scotch he hadn't touched in 20 minutes, and the 3 men loitering near the kitchen with their hands hidden inside their jackets. Chairman Kang Min-yi sat with his back to the floor-to-ceiling glass, the Chicago skyline glittering behind him like a throne of lights. He was laughing at something Alina had said, completely unaware that the woman touching his arm had just orchestrated his execution. I had 45 seconds before the lead tore through the air, and my hand shook just enough to smear the ballpoint ink on the receipt folded in my apron. "Your Glenfiddich, sir," I said, my voice coming out steady and professional, a lie I told with every fiber of my being. As I set the crystal glass down, the amber liquid caught the candlelight. Alina's eyes, cold and blue like the screen of the phone she had just been using to coordinate his death, flicked to mine. Her smile was sweet and poisonous, a sharp contrast to the predatory rhythm of Min-yi's fingers drumming on the table. I knew she was watching for any slip, any break in the invisible facade I had spent months perfecting. Then I did the thing every server is trained never to do. I violated the boundary between his world and mine. As I positioned the glass, my thumb pressed firmly against the back of Min-yi's hand, a brief, electric contact that made his eyes snap to mine. They were darker than I expected, calculating eyes that saw straight into my soul, beneath the cover of the coaster. I slid the folded receipt into his palm. "Read it," I mouthed, the plea catching in my throat. Alina's posture stiffened, a microscopic crack appearing in her porcelain mask. "Is there a problem with the service, darling?" she asked, her voice light but strained. Min-yi didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of the whiskey, his other hand unfolding the note beneath the table where Alina couldn't see. I stood there, tray clutched to my chest, watching his jaw tighten as he scanned the 7 words that had just painted a target on my back. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to die as he set the glass down with a soft, lethal clink. He looked at me for the first time, really looked at me, reading my name tag like he was learning a new language. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice the kind of calm that preceded a storm. He gestured to me, his gaze never leaving Alina's pale face. "Another glass for my fiancé, to loyalty." The restaurant continued its expensive symphony around us, the delicate scrape of silver against porcelain and the hushed conversations of the elite, completely unaware that table 1 was a bomb waiting to detonate. Min-yi sat perfectly still, a predator assessing which direction his prey would bolt. He tasted my name, Naira, like he was learning a new language, then asked how many assassination attempts I had witnessed in my 8 months at the Gilded Lotus. Alina's laugh came out too high, too forced, as she claimed he was scaring the poor girl, but Min-yi's obsidian eyes never left mine. Subtle shift rippled through the room. One of the men near the kitchen entrance stood, his hand sliding inside his jacket. At the bar, the man with the untouched scotch turned his body, angling for a better view. Min-yi saw it too. The calculation on his face was cold, instant, and lethal. In one fluid movement, he stood and yanked me forward, his hand closing around my upper arm like a vice. "You," he hissed loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "spilled whiskey on a $12,000 suit." It was a lie, but it gave him the reason to drag me away from the table without raising an immediate alarm. "When we go through those doors," he whispered, his mouth so close to my ear that any observer would think he was berating me, "you run left. Don't stop. Don't look back. The kitchen doors swung open and the lights went out. Absolute and instant darkness swallowed the gilded lotus. Crystal glasses hit the floor in cascading crashes, and a woman's scream echoed through the void. Minyi propelled me forward into the kitchen just as the emergency lighting kicked in, dim red bulbs that turned the room into a nightmare landscape of shadows and blood-colored light. The kitchen was chaos incarnate. Chefs shouted in a babble of languages as pans clattered, and through the crimson haze, I saw figures moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with cooking. I ran, my cheap work shoes skidding on slick tile. Behind me, the sound of impact rang out, flesh on flesh and a grunt of pain. I risked a glance back and saw Minyi fighting like violence was a language he had spoken since birth, driving his elbow into an attacker's throat with surgical precision. "Grab the girl," someone shouted in accented English. Terror shot through me like electricity. I grabbed a pan of hot oil from the range and hurled it at the man lunging toward me. His screams were inhuman, primal, as he dropped to his knees clawing at his burning skin. The smell of scorched flesh and hot metal hit me, and my stomach tried to climb up my throat. Minyi was suddenly beside me, his hand finding the small of my back to propel me into the dry storage area. 50-pound bags of rice and flour were stacked floor to ceiling, creating a maze of narrow passages. We pressed flat against the concrete wall as footsteps thundered behind us. The space was so narrow my chest was crushed against his, my face buried in the blood-stained fabric of his shirt. Suddenly, the air was filled with a storm of bullets. Wood splintered and metal pinged as bullets punched through the rice bags, sending white grains cascading down on us like rain. We stumbled through the crunching white powder toward the back exit, the winter wind howling just beyond the steel door. The black SUV lurched through the Chicago snow, a bulletproof sanctuary that smelled of gun oil and the copper tang of Minyi's blood. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the ragged rhythm of our breathing as the gilded lotus vanished into a blur of muzzle flashes. Minyi didn't slow down. He barked instructions in Korean to the driver, his jaw tight with a cold, businesslike pragmatism that made my skin prickle. He looked at the graze on my arm with a clinical detachment that felt more intimate than genuine concern, declaring me lucky simply because I was still breathing. We didn't go to a hospital. We went to his home, though that was a word I would never have used. The stronghold sat on a promontory overlooking the black water of Lake Michigan, a massive structure of pure brutalism, concrete and glass, all harsh angles and uncompromising lines. It was beautiful the way a knife is beautiful, cold, sharp, and designed for power. As we passed through retinal scans and security checkpoints, I watched the safe, familiar world of the city disappear, replaced by an absolute, geometric stillness. Minyi led me into a living space that felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was gray, concrete floors, steel fixtures, and monochromatic art that looked like charcoal slashes on white canvas. He draped his ruined suit jacket over my shoulders. It was still warm from his body and smelled of expensive cologne mixed with gunpowder. I pulled it tighter, hatting how my body responded to this small gesture of care from a man who was essentially my captor. "You can't keep me here," I said, trying to summon a defiance that my trembling legs couldn't support. Minyi took a slow sip of amber liquid from a crystal glass, regarding me with obsidian eyes. "What is your alternative, Naira? Walk out into the snow and wait for the Costas to put a bullet through your door." He stepped closer, his presence predatory as he explained that in his world, saving his life made me either very valuable or very dangerous. When I demanded my phone to call my father, Minyi's expression turned into a mask of ice. "Your father is fine. I had my people check on him 20 minutes ago," he said, his voice flat. I opened my mouth to protest his right to strip me of my connection to the outside world, but his next words stopped the air in my lungs. "The hospital he's in, it's mine," he said with the casualness of a business transaction. "I own the building, the equipment keeping him alive, and I own his medical debt, which means, Naira, I own you. The truth settled over me like a suffocating weight. He hadn't protected my father out of kindness. He had secured the ultimate leverage to keep me compliant and grateful. He was a monster who measured lives in terms of utility, and I was now a variable in his deadly equation. "You bastard," I whispered. "Yes," he replied, without a flicker of shame. "But I'm the bastard keeping your father alive." I woke to the sound of alarms screaming through the concrete fortress. The bedroom was still dark, but red emergency lights strobed through the windows, turning the brutalist sanctuary into a horror movie nightmare. The door slammed open, and Minyi filled the frame in full tactical gear, a gun in each hand. His face was carved from a fury so absolute it made my blood run cold. "We're compromised," he growled, grabbing my wrist and dragging me toward the elevator. In the garage, the air was thick with controlled panic, SUVs being loaded, men shouting coordinates, and the smell of exhaust ghosts in the freezing air. As we reached the vehicles, Minyi's gaze swung to me, and what I saw there froze my soul, cold, calculating suspicion. "You," he said softly, and that softness was more terrifying than any shout. "You led them here." He ordered his men to search me, and I stood there, humiliated and terrified, while they checked every seam of my clothes. When they found nothing on my person, the man with the tablet approached, showing a GPS map with a blinking red dot. Minyi shoved me into the back of a speeding SUV, the driver taking off before the door even closed. "The insulin you picked up for your father," Minyi stated, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped beneath his skin. "It was tagged." He held up the evidence bag containing the small pharmaceutical box, my father's life-saving medication, which I had picked up on my lunch break and forgotten in my purse during the chaos. The realization crashed over me like ice water. The Costas had tagged the medication days ago, betting I would become a loose end or a witness. I had led them straight to him like a bloodhound. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but the words were pathetically inadequate. "Do you have any idea how many people are dead right now because you didn't mean to?" Minyi's voice was a broken sound edged with darkness. He grabbed my wrist, yanking me forward, and the barrel of his heavy black gun was suddenly inches from my chest. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't put a bullet in you right now." Terror locked my throat, but beneath it, I felt a jagged, raw defiance. I grabbed his wrist, pressing the cold metal of the barrel directly against my heart through the thin thermal shirt. "Then do it," I challenged, my voice exploding out of me. "But before you pull that trigger, send someone to ensure James Brooks gets his dose, because he's the only innocent person in this entire mess." We stared at each other, breathing hard, the gun pressed between us like a promise or a threat. Outside, Chicago blurred past, streetlights flashing across his obsidian eyes as the rage began to bank, replaced by a lethal, calculating return to business. He lowered the gun slowly, and I could finally breathe. "What keeps you alive is being useful to me," he said. "Then use me," I replied, stronger than I felt. The Stronghold's basement training facility smelled of gun oil, cold concrete, and the lingering scent of sweat. Minyi had led me down there at dawn, while the city was still sleeping, and the lake outside churned gray and restless. He had barely spoken since the revelation about the tracker and my father's medication, his silence heavy with a recalculation I couldn't yet name. He stood behind a table covered in weapons, sorting through them with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "If you're going to survive what's coming," he said, finally looking at me, "you need to know how to protect yourself." I crossed my arms, the borrowed tactical pants and fitted black shirt feeling strange against my skin. I had thought that was what his army of guards was for, but Minyi was quick to remind me that guards cannot be everywhere, and as our escape had proven, nowhere was truly safe. "I'm not interested in keeping you helpless," he said, picking up a compact pistol. He set the gun down and turned to face me fully, his gaze intense. "You're my responsibility. You saved my life, and that creates a debt I take seriously." He admitted he had been wrong to let his paranoia override his instincts about me. Teach me, I said, moving forward until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. If I'm going to be part of whatever war you're planning, teach me how to survive it. Minyi didn't ask for easy. He selected the compact pistol and circled behind me. Suddenly, his chest was against my back, his arms coming around to adjust my grip. Your stance is wrong, he murmured against my ear. Feet shoulder-width apart, bend your knees slightly. You're too rigid. His hands slid down my arms, repositioning them, and every point of contact felt electric. I could feel his breath against my neck, smelling of smoke and steel. Now, he continued, his voice dropping lower, you need to control your breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. The shot comes on the exhale. I tried to focus on the paper silhouette downrange, but all I could think about was the solid weight of his body against mine and the way his hands covered my smaller ones. Squeeze the trigger, he instructed. Don't pull, gentle pressure. The report was deafening, the gun kicking in my hands as the bullet punched through the concrete wall. Better than I expected for a first shot, Minyi said, the hint of a smile in his voice. We spent the next hour like that, his body pressed against mine, his hands correcting my form, his voice low and patient. By the end, I was hitting the target center mass, and my body was humming with an awareness that had everything to do with the man standing behind me. When he finally stepped back, the absence of his touch felt like a physical loss. I set the gun down carefully and looked at him. What now? I asked. Now, Minyi replied, his expression shifting back to the cold business of war. We plan. The air in the penthouse was thick with the scent of ozone and the looming reality of the final confrontation. Minyi had spent the afternoon on a speakerphone call that crackled with tension, his voice dropping into a register of controlled, cold patient murder. He had finally confirmed the depth of the betrayal. His half-brother, Juno, the one everyone thought had died in China, was alive and had been orchestrating the coup for years. He's consolidating power by marrying Alina, Minyi said, his reflection in the glass looking like something carved from stone. The ceremony is in 3 days at the Costa estate. He thinks I'm too much of a coward to show up. I watched him move toward the sideboard, his movements possessing a predatory grace despite the exhaustion etched into his features. He pulled out a small, velvet-lined box from his desk, not jewelry, but a message. Inside sat a heavy gold band with Korean characters engraved on the interior, his mother's wedding ring. Juno's mother died in childbirth. My mother raised him as her own until the exile, Minyi explained, his voice roughening with a rare, raw bitterness. He repaid that love by trying to destroy everything she protected. The ring is a message. You betrayed family. This is what happens to those who betray family. But the ring wasn't being sent alone. One of Minyi's men entered, carrying a tablet that displayed a waxy, clinical photograph of a severed right hand, the ring already forced onto the third finger. It belonged to the corrupt priest who was supposed to officiate the wedding, a man who had been persuaded to reconsider his career choices. The casual brutality of it should have sent me running for the door, but as I looked at the image, I felt only a cold, hard satisfaction. The girl who had served appetizers at the Gilded Lotus was gone, replaced by someone who had watched a warehouse explode and lived to tell the tale. The package has already been delivered, the man reported. Minyi closed the box with a final, clinical click. His eyes met mine, and they were filled with a dangerous, dark promise. He wasn't just sending a warning to Juno. He was signaling that I, the invisible waitress who had ruined their perfect hit, was no longer just a witness. I was a variable they couldn't control, a shadow now standing in the light beside the chairman. We're going to the wedding, he said flatly, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw as if he were marking me. And in the chaos, we eliminate the threat permanently. The midnight blue silk dress was a work of art, hugging my curves with an elegance that felt like a lie. It looked innocent, but beneath the shimmering fabric, Minyi had sewn a ballistic weave designed to slow a bullet just enough to keep it from being fatal. Professional makeup had transformed my face, highlighting my cheekbones until I looked like someone who belonged among Chicago's elite rather than someone who had ever carried a serving tray. My hair was swept up in a disciplined twist, revealing diamond earrings that doubled as microtransmitters so Minyi's team could track my every move inside the lion's den. "You look like a queen," Minyi murmured, appearing behind me in the mirror. He was devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit, his own appearance altered by colored contacts and a fake scar. He handed me an elegant, compact pistol that fit perfectly into a hidden pocket of my dress. "If anyone threatens you, don't hesitate. Shoot first. Apologize never." The drive to the Costa estate felt surreal. We passed through security checkpoints with false identities that held up under the scrutiny of men in dark suits. No one looked at us twice as we entered the grand ballroom, which was decorated with white roses for a ceremony that was really a coronation of betrayal. I spotted Alina Voss immediately. She stood near the entrance, radiant in a gown of white silk that shimmered like royalty. When her eyes passed over me, there was no flicker of recognition, no realization that I was the waitress who had burned her world to the ground. To her, I was just another face in the crowd, a casual dismissal of someone who didn't matter. "She doesn't see you," Minyi whispered against my ear. "Well done." We took our seats 6 rows back, close enough to witness the sham but far enough to remain part of the shadows. The processional music swelled, and Juno appeared at the altar. He looked at Alina as she walked down the aisle as if she were a crown he was about to place on his head. I felt the cold weight of the pistol against my hip and Minyi's hand tighten around mine. The standard words about love and commitment rang hollow in the room, but the wait was almost over. Minyi pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, ready to ignite the chaos. The screens positioned around the ballroom suddenly flickered, replacing the image of the happy couple with the grainy security footage from the Gilded Lotus wine cellar. Alina's voice filled the room, cold and sharp as razor wire, confirming the hit on Minyi. Chaos erupted as the Costa family realized the depth of the treachery, and Minyi stood, removing his colored contacts to reveal his true obsidian eyes. "Hello, brother," he said calmly, walking down the aisle while Juno snarled in fury. Juno moved with desperate speed, pointing his gun not at Minyi, but directly at me. I saw Minyi's expression shift from controlled fury to raw terror as he moved to put himself between me and the bullet. But I didn't wait for a miracle. I moved on pure instinct, my hand finding the pistol hidden in my dress in one smooth motion Minyi had drilled into me. We fired simultaneously. The impact hit me in the chest, the ballistic weave knocking the air from my lungs, but Juno wasn't so lucky. My shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the floor. The room transformed into a symphony of violence as soldiers and enforcers opened fire. Through the haze, Alina appeared, her white wedding dress torn and splattered with blood. Her face was a mask of fury as she raised her gun toward my face. "You were supposed to be nothing," she hissed. "I was never nothing," I replied, my voice certain. "I was just invisible." Before she could pull the trigger, I threw myself inside her guard, grabbing her wrist and forcing the weapon upward. We struggled on the marble floor, her desperation making her dangerous, until my hand found the small, sharp knife she had hidden in her bouquet. I didn't hesitate. I drove the blade between her ribs. I watched as the red flower of blood bloomed across her white silk, her eyes wide with the shock of being bested by the invisible waitress. Minyi appeared beside me, his hand finding mine as the Costa estate burned behind us. Inside the getaway SUV, I looked at my hands, expecting to see a stranger, but I felt only a bone-deep satisfaction. I had survived the shadows to become something else entirely. "You're the queen of this empire now," Minyi said, cupping my face as the Chicago lights blurred past. "Not my prisoner, but my choice." I looked into his dark eyes and saw my reflection, no longer a ghost but a survivor. My father was safe, his medical bills paid by the blood and violence we had claimed. "I'll have you," I whispered, kissing him. "Monster and all." We sat together in the concrete fortress, ruling over the city we had set on fire, two souls forged in a brutal empire built on the single note that changed everything.